Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Genchrome. I'm the CEO and founder of Genchrome, and we are going to talk about Is 2025 a good year for your deal? Strategic insights from pharma leaders and investors. So I'm joined today by Philippe Lopes, Executive VP at Ipsen, and by Roel Bulthuis, Managing Partner at Syncona. Shall I ask maybe a quick round of introduction, maybe starting with Philippe, if you want to explain who you are and maybe a bit about Ipsen and maybe your role in regards of M&A. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Caroline. So I'm Philippe Lopes-Fernandes. I'm the CBO of Ipsen. I've been at Ipsen 4 years, spearheading with David Lowe and the rest of the executive team a new strategy to focus on 3 therapeutic areas: oncology, rare disease, and neuroscience. We're a mid-sized company, a global mid-sized company that has about 35% of our revenue in the US, 40% in Europe, and the rest is spread across all the remaining geographies in Asia, Latin, Middle East, etc. We've been very acquisitive, and we've added about 25 programs in the past 3 years. We've created from scratch a new franchise of rare liver disease, and we have now 2 products on the market in 3 indications, and we have 1 phase 3 and 1 phase 2 that are in this rare liver disease, and we intend to do more. We feel that this size is a right size to play a role in the current pharma ecosystem, and I'll talk more about that later.
Okay, merci. Thank you, Philippe. Roel, do you want to introduce yourself and Syncona?
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks for the invitation. So yeah, I'm Roel, Managing Partner, Head of Investments at Syncona. So we are a London-based and London Stock Exchange listed investment platform, invest primarily in healthcare therapeutics and run a strategy where our bread and butter is really company formation. So a lot of what we do is working with academic founders to create companies, build companies, scale companies, and take those companies all the way through the clinic and towards registrations. We selectively also invest in companies that come to us with later stage assets. We may want to talk about that a little bit later, but those are really where we see opportunities to change the course or the direction of a company. In all cases, we aim to fund our companies to have control of destiny, to get to data, to put them in a position to make a decision whether they want to be standalone entities or if they want to partner with or be acquired by a pharma company. So it will be an interesting discussion. Looking forward to it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Roel. And just about myself, I'm Caroline Bouliat, CEO and founder of Genchrome, as I mentioned. I'm a pharmacist background, and I've worked many years in the industry, in the big pharma, GSK, Pfizer, Merck, and my roles were mainly commercial roles, but I was also launching products, but I was also working very closely with the BD team, with people like Philippe, to particularly on the commercial due diligence of the asset. So we are going to start this webinar and the question. You have the possibility to ask questions. There is a Q&A session during the webinar. If we have time, we will try to go through the question. If we don't, we will try to answer to those questions after the webinar. So, and we have just Manon in the background helping for the technology, and she did organize this webinar. So thanks a lot, Manon, for this. So let's start with the first question. Manon, could you share the slides? So first, about trend, what do you see, what key trend in the industry do you expect to impact deals in 2025? So maybe we can start with Philippe on this question. And we did put some illustration. Maybe we can go to the next slide, Manon, some illustration, just Philippe, to give you some keywords that we've seen in the press recently, and we also added some figures that we've seen that seeing that the cost of R&D is increasing, the time duration of clinical trial keep increasing as well. Success rate is lower, and average peak year sale for drugs is lower as well. So just wanted to have your view on maybe some of those trends or other trends, Philippe.
Yeah. So trends are, I mean, I'm going to be a bit general first in terms of the pharma industry, and then more specific about what trends I find more interesting and more relevant for the audience. Generally, there's still a lot of pharma companies that have loss of exclusivity that are going to be very significant in the next 3 to 5 years. And they need to prepare that now because they are going to lose something for between 5 to 20 billion of revenues, and they need to compensate for that. The other aspect is there's still an unmet need in a ton of diseases where the advances of science are bringing potential solutions, and this should and this will require investment, but this is also something that is naturally feeding the appetite for all pharma companies, small, mid, and large, to continue to invest on innovation. There's also overall, and we're going to we hear a lot about the price reform in the US, but there's price reforms in every country in the world, and each country has their own way to try to manage the cost of healthcare, and it's becoming increasingly more difficult to navigate that. And the old goal of let's get a drug approved is not enough. We need to get a drug approved, but we need to get a drug with a package that is solid enough to be able to have the right discussion with the price experts and the systems everywhere in the world. And again, that becomes increasingly more complex. There's going to be a lot in large indications because the large pharma, they need products that are going to be multi-billion. So we were talking about blockbusters in the past, so a drug that reached $1 billion of revenue. A blockbuster is not enough for the large players. They need multi-billion revenue drugs, and that's why we see a lot in the obesity market, because this is the perspectives are that this is something between 80 and 120 billion market. So definitely a ton of money, a ton of value there. Also, you have your big buzzword immunology. Why is immunology back on the table? Because there's large indications that can create these multi-billion markets. That being said, there's also a lot of advance in technology that is allowing to target better group of patients that have some genetic mutation or some specificity of their line of disease. That is a reduced group, and where we can bring a better solution that is going to target this subgroup of patients. The problem for big pharma is these subgroup of patients are going to generate revenues that are going to be between 500 million and 1 billion. So that's not really good enough for the large pharma. That's why there's a group of mid-sized players that are going to be really interested in that, and it's going to be more efficient cost-wise to develop these products. It's going to really bring some good value for these patients that are going to have their needs addressed in a much more targeted way. And a company like Ipsen is going to be very interested in developing these products and marketing them, and we have the global reach to maximize this. So there's going to be all these trends that are going to collide into a very interesting pharma market in 2025.
Thank you, Philippe. Roel, could I ask you the same questions? What do you see as a key trend?
Sorry for that. Someone was trying. Yeah, same question, but hopefully a different answer. Because I think a lot of the things that Philippe said were quite relevant there, from kind of a pharma strategic perspective. So maybe more from an investor perspective. I think sort of no news that we all know that we've been in probably one of the sort of longest sustained biotech bear markets that so most of us have seen, and we've seen a number in the last couple of decades, which has had quite a significant impact on the way that we finance and build our companies. So we've gone through this long period where the cost of capital was quite high, which has an impact on our ability to finance companies. It has an impact for biotech almost always directly on the total volume of capital that is available for our industry. So while, as Philippe said, the medical need hasn't changed, it's always there. When you see an increase in cost of capital, you always see a decrease in the amount of capital that gets invested in our sector. And that has an impact on how fast we grow and how many companies that we can create. It's going to be interesting to see. As an optimist, I would say we're coming out of that bear market. There's still a bit of uncertainty geopolitically, but also economically. We haven't seen the number of rate cuts that I think we had believed we were going to see at the beginning of the year. But it feels like we're coming out of that. And for our sector, I think that leads us to a very interesting moment, because, as Philippe said, there's a huge gap, forward-looking gap, in the pipelines of many of our large pharma companies. Due to patent expiries, there's a need to plug some holes in those pipelines. And because of what has happened in the last couple of years, our perception is that pharma has taken, I guess, a less active approach to M&A for the last couple of years, and maybe a little bit more of a wait-and-see approach, because they've also been affected by changes in cost of capital. And there's been less pressure, competitive pressure from equity capital markets to their M&A and to their BD practices. So that gap is there. We see BD and M&A teams going out there to look for ideas. We believe they're primarily looking to add things to their late-stage pipelines, because I think most pharma companies are fairly realistic by now that their own R&D productivity requires them to look externally to add to their pipeline. I think that also reflects, and some pharma companies have sort of more recently been confronted by shareholders with some reflection on when you do early stage deals and you feed that into your R&D pipeline, it doesn't necessarily lead to higher productivity, i.e. the probability of success of those things is relatively low. So focus on late stage deals, and that for CEOs means, I think also to something Philippe said earlier, more emphasis on building a clinical commercial positioning plan for your assets to position yourself for a potential partnership or M&A with pharma. So I think interesting year, trend will be more deals.
Perfect. I like the more deals. I'm sure everybody likes the more deals on the phone, online. So maybe Manon, we can move to the next slide. So question around licensing and acquisition, and key question around what circumstances is a licensing a more strategic option than a full acquisition, and vice versa. Manon, we put some slides to illustrate that. I mean, starting with Philippe, we saw quite a few active deals or licensing in the last few months and years. Quite happy to have your illustration of the answer with your some examples that you might have in Ipsen.
Certainly. At the end of the day, it's we don't necessarily plan for licensing or acquisition at the beginning. We look at the asset and we say what makes us feel that the asset is right and that we are right for developing and maximizing the access to the asset for patients worldwide. And once the answer to that is positive, then we say, okay, what is the best way to internalize that? And that's a discussion with the originator. And sometimes it's M&A, sometimes it's licensing. The rule of thumb is it's easier to do a licensing deal for early stage assets and easier to do an M&A for later stage assets. Later stage assets, you want to have you have already a lot of data, and then it's really about execution and global commercial execution, and then it's something where you just need to put the effort and get running. So that's what we did with Albireo last year. For earlier stage assets, you say, well, there's still a lot of unknowns, and you'd rather the licensing deal allows you to structure the deal along the key milestones, so that there's going to be a share of the upside as you reach the key de-risking milestones. So it's that's why that's what makes us split the decision between M&A and licensing. And of course, sometimes there are exceptions.
Thank you, Philippe. We have also a slide that we have for Roel to answer this question. Maybe Manon, you can move to the next slide. So I'll leave you commenting. Obviously, there is some M&A and very nice exits that you've done, and quite a nice multiples in your portfolio exit, Roel. And we put on the right-hand side recent also nice licensing deals that one of your portfolio company, Kel, has done with AstraZeneca. So quite happy to hear you on those elements.
Yeah, and I think from a pharma perspective, I think very clear what Philippe just explained for us or for our portfolio companies is the answer to the question really depends on what we want to achieve with the deal. And in the end game for us and for most of the entrepreneurs that we work with is we want to build a company. And if we feel at some point that there's a level of maturity that puts us in a position where we can decide whether we want to be standalone or if we want to be part of something larger, or if we believe that our asset would be in better hands with a company like Ipsen or another large pharma company, that's the moment where we will consider an M&A transaction. For us as an investor, that's a moment where we can realize returns. And for the people that we work with, that's obviously sort of getting the products often that they develop and that they want to see in the hands of physicians and in a position to treat patients that gets them on track to do that. You will see on the left side of this slide that there's a number of moments in our past where we have sold our companies mid-stage or late-stage clinical. So before you get to the point where you have a readout of your registrational trial. The reason we can do that and the reason we've generated good returns on those deals is because we were always in a position to go without those deals. We were always financed to be able to run those trials on our own, to build those companies independently. And that puts you in a good position to have a discussion with Philippe or one of his peers because they want to buy the company, but we don't have to sell the company. That's a position where we want to be as an investor. Now, in some situations, and Quell is an interesting example, you may have also seen Autolus, one of our other portfolio companies, did a significant deal with BioTech earlier in the year. Because we often build, and this is not just us, but many investors, we often try to build our companies with a set of options, with optionality, what we develop in-house, and maybe there's part of our technology platform or part of our portfolio that for strategic reasons, we do not want to develop in-house or cannot develop in-house. And in those cases, we might benefit from a partnership, from a licensing deal with another company. Often that would be a pharma company. In Quell's case, we felt really there's strong conviction about their in-house programs. So their lead programs are being developed on their own. We are running a clinical trial with their lead program. We're seeing the data readouts from that right now. And because the platform had the opportunity to develop additional assets in indications that were, I guess, in scope, not something you would develop in a biotech environment, that would be harder to finance for a privately funded biotech company. AZ was an amazing partner for us because they have the ability to develop and do larger trials. They have an interest, as Philippe said, they want to develop blockbusters, they need big markets, and they have the organization to set themselves up for that. And so they're very complementary in that sense to our own organization to develop a pipeline. So again, that's a situation where we can create value by doing a partnership while we keep control of destiny by developing our own programs.
Thank you.
Yeah, and let's be clear. I mean, our destinies are tied. We come from different angles to achieve the same thing. And when we do an M&A and that we provide a return and liquidity for Syncona and the other investors, this allows them to invest in the next generation of innovation that is going to be important for our future pipeline. So it's very an interesting cycle, and we work, again, coming from two different angles towards the same goal.
Okay, a nice ecosystem.
Yes.
Feeding. Okay, thank you. We can maybe move to the next slide. I mean, a key question and around the big pharma and mid-size, maybe what are the differences we can see in terms of deal making? We put a slide on the next one. We have on the left-hand side the big pharma that we know, and the mid-size pharma. On the right-hand side, we can see Ipsen, Philippe, on the mid-size side. So quite happy to have your view and opinion on advantage and disadvantage, maybe on both.
Yeah, I think there's no advantage and disadvantage. There's a different perspective. Big pharma is addressing diseases that we cannot address. We cannot, develop drugs for Alzheimer because the cost of that development and the cost of the infrastructure to commercialize that is way above what we can finance. On the other side, as I was explaining at the beginning, with the advance of science that allow to identify better subgroup of patients, there's really the possibility to develop drugs that are going to benefit, very strongly these smaller group of patients, where us as mid-size pharma are very relevant. And the big pharma, for them, it's a distraction and it's too small. So again, it's not us versus them. It's the variety of the ecosystem that works to the best benefit of patients.
Thank you, Philippe. Roel, do you have any perspective, maybe in the way you approach different type of pharma?
Maybe on a slightly sort of different dimension, because this is not a sort of black and white or one-off spectrum, right? So that if you look at these two boxes, even there's quite a few companies that have moved across from the left to the right and from the right to the left in the last decade. The other interesting observation is that on both the left and the right side of your slide, there are companies that didn't exist 20 years ago. So what is big pharma today, or what is mid-sized pharma today, or your partner today, might not be sort of on the top left of this slide, but might be in a position, if you have the right kind of strategic collaboration, to grow there. Our asset cycles are 10, 12 years from discovery to the moment that we see a launch. So there's a lot that can happen there. I think the interesting thing when we think about partnerships, or when we think about M&A, but maybe less so, because if it's a one-off deal for us, that's the moment where we part ways with our companies. But you always want to find that you work with an organization that will prioritize your asset, and and that has the means, the resources, and the strategy and the commitment, strategic commitment to maintain that priority. And this is something that I guess both Philippe and I have seen many times over our careers, and actually we've seen that quite often when we work together in the past, is pharmas will change strategy over time. And so you want to be convinced that you partner with someone who, in the period sort of following your deal and up to the point where you're actually going to see a return on your investment, that you have someone who's committed to resourcing your strategy. So depending on the asset, that might be quite a different organization. That might be a mid-sized, or it might be a large organization. It might be an emerging company that's not on this slide yet. You want to see that there's a commitment and there's a role for your assets in their organization to see that going forward. And I'm actually not sure. One of the points that Philippe mentioned earlier, this fetish for sort of blockbuster indications for large pharma. I'm not sure if that's a long-term sustainable thing to do, because increasingly, when we see new discoveries, a lot of what we see that is really groundbreaking is new biology that is very specific to not a disease, but to a specific subset of patients within that disease, that allows us to develop a drug that has a meaningful clinical impact as compared to standard of care. And so I'm not even sure that in many cases whether a company that needs kind of only blockbuster drugs is going to be the right partner for me, because I need someone who can focus also on sort of a commercial opportunity that is a different scale, that's more targeted to be successful.
Okay.
And is not going to deprioritize something that, frankly, is very well targeted for a group of patients that are going to respond superbly to these therapies. So you want to have the focus, and if they say, well, we like it, but if it's going to be only 800 million peak sales, then it's going to be second or third priority. It's not going to be the right thing for, and again, for the patient in the first place.
Okay. Thank you very much for those perspectives. Maybe, Manon, we can move to the next slide. So, key question, and we are a month away from JP Morgan, so we know quite a few people will be going there, especially people online. How can biotech companies improve their attractiveness to pharma from an M&A or partnerships point of view? Philippe, any perspective and things you could recommend for those biotechs on the phone, online?
Yes, there's several aspects. I would say doing a deal can be pretty fast. Actually, it can be a few weeks. Preparing a deal is pretty long, mostly because we need to get our people comfortable with the science. And you as CEO, CBO, CMO of a small biotech, you've been living with this science for many years, so you know everything about it. We don't have this knowledge, and we need to get up to speed. And sometimes it's something that goes fast. Sometimes it's something that is going to take a bit more time. And usually, the more innovative the approach, the more it's going to take time for our scientists to absorb and to get familiar and to be comfortable with it. And remember, we see a lot. At Ipsen, we see about 1,000 targets every year. At other pharma companies, it's probably a magnitude of that. So we try to sort out things, in an efficient way, knowing that it's never going to be perfect. So we say, okay, what are the things where we are sure that we want to dig a bit deeper into? What are the things that we are sure that it's not for us, and we're not going to be the right partners? And then there's a gray zone in between where we want to do things because, frankly, we know that science is complicated and we need to go into things that are challenging us a bit and getting us out of our comfort zone. And yet, getting out of our comfort zone means, understanding these new technologies, this new approach, and taking more time. So do not underestimate that, and do not underestimate the fact that this initial phase is best placed before you need a deal. Because if you say, I need you to get comfortable in a few weeks because I need a deal in a month, it's going to be very tight. If you say, well, we're going to need a deal next year, but we want you to be familiar with our technology, that's a good approach. So that's the first element. The second element is not everyone is your right partner. So don't try to maximize the number of interactions. Try to maximize the quality of the interactions with the parties that could be the right partners. Ipsen is not going to be your partner if you have something in obesity or in Alzheimer. Not for us. This is for a big pharma. Go talk to the big pharma. My team might take your meeting politely because they're intrigued by what's new in Alzheimer. But the truth is, it's a waste of time for you. It's a waste of time for us. And you should really go into this discussion by saying, okay, let's make sure that we are going to have the quality discussion that we need. And if you put yourself in this perspective, it's going to be really good.
Thank you, Philippe. Roel, do you want to give us your view?
Yeah, from an investor, because I think that's really good advice. And I'm also going to say that as an investor, I'm slightly allergic to this question because we're not in the business of sort of making ourselves look good for someone. We're in the business of creating kind of shiny objects that people want but can't have, because then that's when they pay the highest price for them. So I think it's a long game. And again, I think the advice that Philippe just gave is very fair when you go into your meetings to JP Morgan. I would say as an investor, and maybe we are quite specific in the way that we look at building our companies, it is a long game. And the most important part of being an attractive partner or being an attractive acquisition opportunities is being in a position to build your company without those deals. So if you're in a position to be a standalone company, and you have control of destiny to develop your most valuable assets, that's the starting point. So make sure you run a business plan, a financing plan, a capital plan, an operating plan that allows you to do that. That's the first part for me from an investor perspective. When you do that, you start to think strategically about sort of how you build an ecosystem around your company. And that means that when you populate your leadership, when you populate your board, your advisory groups, you start to think about, based on sort of the program that I'm developing, who are the people that I want to surround myself with? Who are the people who are going to be important because they're associated with my company, but they're also related to, or they're also a sounding board for key decision makers in pharma. I want to build that network and start building that network early on. And then I would go into some of the things that Philippe also said, which is in a very targeted way, start to build relationships, start to socialize your idea without the expectation immediately of wanting to do a deal. So you want people to understand, you want people to engage with your idea while you have the ability to develop. That, in my mind, is going to set you up for a successful discussion when it comes to a deal, because then it's not you're selling something, is you have a relationship with someone who believes, and you jointly believe, that there's a deal to be done. And that's going to be a much more meaningful situation for both sides of that equation.
Yeah, and what Roel just said is super important, because at the end of the day, it's not about a shiny object. It's about what is the best way to do the best for this program. And no program is perfect, and no company is perfect. But we need the strengths of the originator of the biotech, their knowledge about the program, and we need a partner that is going to be able to maximize, to accelerate, to globalize. And it's a meeting of minds. And if this meeting of minds happen in the right way, then everybody wins. And that's what you need to look for. What is the best for the program?
Okay, thanks a lot. So take time and build the relationship. Don't be in rush in a way to do it. Another question on how does integrating a strong commercial and access strategy early in development enhance attractiveness to investors and pharma? We've discussed already at the beginning of this webinar the importance of those aspects. We have a slide to illustrate that, maybe starting with Philippe. Manu, if you want to just move to the next slide. Philippe, do you want to give us some perspective on the commercial and access aspects and maybe some key advice maybe for people listening to us?
So let me start with what we're not expecting. We're not expecting you to be an expert of all the market access dynamics in every country in the world. Even for us, it's complicated. So this is definitely not what we expect from a small biotech. But what we expect you is to understand the fact that a regulatory approval is not enough, and that the market dynamic and the pricing dynamic and the access discussions are going to need the right data package that is going to, and this is put together as early as the start of the phase 2. So with that in mind, we can work together on finding the right angle. And there's not going to be a perfect angle, let's be clear. We don't have the truth, and we don't expect you to have all the answers, but we're going to work with you to find the best way to bring the right answers to the regulatory, but also to the payers, so that we can maximize the access.
Thank you very much, Philippe. We have also another slide that we took from your deck presentation. Roel, do you want to comment? There is obviously, we can see a platform with company launch and commercial strategy. Quite happy to understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about the slide, but it does say that sort of as an investor, we invest quite significant resources in sort of helping our companies build and scale their companies on the premise that if you translate science to a clinical experiment, you do that when you understand what the product is that you want to develop. And to understand what the product is that you want to develop, you have to have some level of understanding of what your commercial landscape looks like, what market access will mean with your product in that market. Because how shall I say it? When you understand the commercial positioning of your product, or the commercial positioning that you want to achieve with your product, and when you understand the market access implications or challenges around your product, it often informs the way that you do your clinical development. And at an earlier stage, it might actually inform the way that you run experiments before you go to the clinic. So it's a really important aspect of thinking about product development. Product development is not a scientific experiment anymore. It's not a sort of bottom up, I do this and then I find out that, and then I do the next thing. It is actually an iterative process of thinking through sort of my science, how would it translate to a clinical impact? How would that clinical impact lead to something that sort of could be a commercial proposition? And then thinking back to, can I actually develop, can I do the experiments that get me there? And so it's not a linear thing. It's something that you have to cycle through the more you learn about the product. And we really believe that that is something that should be central, therefore, to your product strategy. The other reason why we believe it is important, again, goes back to something that Philippe said earlier. So we will be working on something, so our companies will be working on something that they spend years on, that they understand in and out, inside out. So there's all this science, everything is there. And I will have initially a very short moment where I can convince someone who is on the pharma side or who is a sort of key potential strategic partner of what I'm doing. That's not the moment to do a big science download. That's a moment to bring the product to life. And understanding my commercial trajectory is so important to bring my science to life, to bring my product development to life. So there's so many different reasons why you want to understand and map and picture your product development trajectory. Where you often early on you have to make assumptions. We don't know the sort of entire trajectory, but we are going to try to make assumptions to the best of our knowledge today. We expect that this is going there. What we can do as an investor there is we have a bunch of people who are either investors on our team or who are venture partners, executive partners that come from a commercial background in pharma. We have advisors that we can bring in. So these are kind of the things that we can do to help our teams to get there. But fundamentally, I think it's a big part of what you do when you build a company.
And frankly, Caroline, it's also probably something that you see as an advisor. I mean, you certainly advise a lot of companies like Ipsen and others, but going into helping smaller companies, biotechs, about what it's going to take and what are going to be the angles that they can start thinking, is probably more and more of something that you see in your business.
Yeah, no, you're right, Philippe, and that's we have concrete examples. And biotech we are working with, they are really good and with their science, but where they really need help is to say, okay, but what does it mean? Explain me. Try to explain as maybe a child, a 5-year-old child. Explain me in a simple manner as well, because you need to be able to do it. And then how do you translate that in a nice story that you can share, obviously, with a pharma? So that's definitely something we do. There's a lot around simplifying, make it accessible as well, because they are in their science and they love their science. So that's definitely really important. And as you are on the pharma side, Philippe, that's true that pharma has some expectation. They have the unmet need, the value proposition, and obviously the access is probably one of the first questions you ask when you are doing a due diligence for a biotech. What is going to be the market and the price for this product?
Yeah.
We have another slide from your deck, Roel. I don't know if you want to comment on it.
No, not at this stage. I don't think it adds to the discussion that we're having.
Maybe we can move to the next then. So time, we've discussed the importance of time before, and maybe we can discuss what are the main factors to consider when deciding the best time to make a deal. Who wants to start for this question?
Why don't we start with Roel?
I was going to offer that so that we don't put you on the spot all the time. I think it's a really good question, and there's no single answer to it, because in my mind, it really depends on who you are as an organization, what the product is that you are developing. I mean, my general answer, and I've given some of that earlier on already, is for me, the best time is when I'm in a position to go on my own, because then I'm in a good negotiating position, because I have a fallback. I can do without the deal. But to take that down to sort of a practical situation, I'm assuming that many in the audience are developing a therapeutic. Depending on the therapeutic area that you work in or the modality that you work in, you will have thought about how you can develop and how you can finance the development of that product over time. You also have a pretty good picture of the capabilities that you and your team have to develop that asset. And you often have an assessment of how able you are as an organization to develop the drug sort of through its cycle, because sometimes you have to be realistic. You might not be in a position to take it all the way through clinical, or your investors might not be able to help you facilitate that kind of development. So that will have an impact on doing that. So for me, it again comes down on to not take this day by day. Sort of don't go from one financing to the next one or from one trial to the next one, but really make sure that you think through the entire product development cycle, company development cycle, the capital plan that comes with that, the resourcing that you need for that. Because to the discussion we had earlier on, once you have identified where the window is in which you want to transact, you will have to start to prepare for that well in advance, probably a couple of years in advance. There's always situations where you have no other options. You have to put the company on the block, or you have to do that deal to raise some financing. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about optimal timing for a deal. It's one that you can prepare for. And that is really, you need a window because you need flexibility, because you cannot sort of define the specific date that you can do a deal. And to approach that window, you probably need some time to prepare for it, which is not a couple of weeks. That's usually 2-3 years to socialize where you want to be.
Okay, thanks, Roel. And maybe, Philippe, you might have a different perspective, or the pharma perspective, for the best time for a deal.
No, actually, I have exactly the same perspective. I think it's do not underestimate the amount of time that it's going to take. Be ready for that, and make sure that your financing is going to be to give you the ample time. I mean, there's nothing worse than saying, I need a deal next month because I'm running out of money. That's in that case, the financing is dictating you the timing versus the stage of development, the stage of discussions with the partners, and the best thing for the program. So make sure that you have that in mind, and make sure that you don't pass on the right collaboration because it's not the time that you had planned. For example, if you had thought, I'm going to go for a development where I'm going to take this product in phase 2, and then there's the right discussions that are coming earlier. If it's right, go for it. It's you need to be able to change your plans, and it's and it can get to beautiful results. Sometimes you see people that say, no, I stick to my plan, and then 2 years later things have evolved. It's not the same priorities. The pharma company that was interested has has done other deals. I mean, we're not staying idle. We're always bringing new projects, and then suddenly these new projects have priority. So you need to be able to really make sure that you again, it's this meeting of mind. When you spot it, you go for it.
Perfect, Philippe. We come to a very key question. What are the essential components of a strong pitch from both an investor and pharma perspective? And maybe, Roel, I ask you to answer first because we put investor first. Anything is what is the most important element you want to highlight?
I'll say it in very sort of simple and concise. So to bring the opportunity to life. I do not have the capacity. I definitely do not have the capacity. Some of my team are smarter, but I do not have the capacity to understand a lot of detail in a meeting at JP Morgan or any conference. So I need to see the movie. So, and that is often something that I need to see in 1 or 2 slides. So you want to start with sort of with the end game, essentially. What product am I developing? Why is that relevant? How am I going to get there? And that's really, really important. Way too often we see the very academic approach to it's history lesson, I call it. It's first we did this, and then we did that, and now we did this, and now we need money for this. It's never going to convince us because I don't understand why that's relevant. So that's it. So just show me the movie.
Thank you, Roel. Philippe.
Yeah, totally the same. Actually, there's going to be ample time, and yes, if we are interested in the movie, we are going to want to understand how you came up with the idea, what went wrong at the beginning, what got you to the right path, what are things that are still keeping you up at night. We're going to dig into that because it's important for us to absorb as much as we can about all the history and what went wrong, what's going well, etc. But the first part is why should we even talk? And this is, same as Roel. I mean, I'm not trying to be cynical. I'm trying to say we are human. We are bombarded by opportunities, and we need to connect to what is our purpose at the end of the day. With you might have something that is super scientifically, but what is it going to do to patients? And if you can interest my team, and I'm not a scientist, so that's really, I mean, for can I bring something to the patients? And me, Ipsen, with you, biotech ABC, if we team up, are we going to make something that is going to be changing the life of some patients? If the answer is yes, then perfect. Then let's work. Let's put all our energy, all our passion to that, and then we can dig, and we're going to put to pull all the strings. And we know that things are not going to be easy, but we'll put our passion to it. But let's first look at that. What we don't like, and believe me, we see that from time to time, is companies that reach out to us saying, we have a product for, say, women health. Women are half of the world population. There are 7 billion people in the world, so that's 3.5 billion women. If you give that product to them for $1 a month, you have a multi-billion dollar, and it's like totally the wrong angle. We're not doing it for that. And this is totally unrealistic. So make it about the patient.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Maybe we had another question, and I think it was Philippe. Maybe it's a question for me. I think that we put together.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a question for you. But it's I think it was my question a bit earlier.
Okay.
You see biotech, you see pharma, you see investors. How can you tie the knots in interacting and making sure that you facilitate the navigation into this ecosystem that is increasingly more complex?
So
And we all need help understanding some aspects, and you guys can play a big role.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Philippe. And actually, because we had this question, we put a slide to explain on the why and how we can help biotech. Obviously, we are a team of people with expertise in pharma, so we know the pharma. We know the way pharma think. Not that they think very differently, but we know what they have in mind, and that's definitely what people value. And the other thing is, if we talk specifically about partnership, we can help the biotech to think about what is their strategy, where do they want to go with their asset, to help them not to go to these 100 pharma companies, but to target a very specific companies for very precise criteria. Why I'm going to see Ipsen for all those reasons. So we help them to do that. And not targeting many companies, but just do a few, but do it very well. The other thing we do, and we discuss that, is we help them to build their story, to simplify. I mean, these few slides that we've discussed, Roel, how can you make your story very short, very impacting, that can be understood by everyone? It can be understood by Roel, it can be understood by Philippe, but it can be understood by anyone who could read your slide. And obviously, there's a lot of things around what is the unmet need, the patient. What is the unmet need? Why do we need this drug? The value proposition, the access, in a way, need to be integrated in this pitch, because we know it's really important. If there is no funding for a drug, it's going to be really a big challenge to sell it. So that's what we do. And obviously, we know the people we can help also to navigate within pharma, because there are a lot of people, and we can also certainly help the biotech to navigate this complex environment. And the bigger the pharma is, the more complex it is. So yes, that was what I wanted to say. We do have other questions that we received separately, so maybe we can take some of them. There was an interesting question. I know, Philippe, you mentioned something on the don't, but Roel, do you have maybe things that you don't want to see as well? What are the don't, when, especially when pitching any other things you wouldn't want to see?
Well, I mentioned my history lesson already, and the kind of the data dump. I think it's not so much a don't. I think it's what we want to see is conviction, and we want to see conviction around sort of the companies that we invest in, and the companies that sort of pharma buys are companies that translate science to products that will have an impact on patients. And so we need to see conviction in that journey. And so maybe there is a don't there. It's not just science. Science is amazing. It's fundamental to everything that we do. But we don't invest in science. We invest in science that can be the basis for a product that treats patients. As long as you remember that, I think you're in the right place. If you're going to try to convince us to invest because you have a piece of unique science, I don't think that is what we do in this industry.
Yeah, and maybe I add to that. We want to see conviction and authenticity. We don't want to see arrogance, and you need to find the right balance. I mean, it's we need what we want is to see that you're really passionate about your data, but you also have the humility to know that there's going to be a lot of things that need to fall in place to make it happen. And frankly, every approval of a pharma product is a small miracle. There's so much that can go wrong, and we know that when you talk to us, you've been already through a lot of these oops where there's been things that were great and things that were not so great. No program is perfect. No company is perfect. So bring it with conviction, bring it with authenticity, but bring it also with humility to say, there's things that we don't have the answers.
Yeah. Thank you, Philippe. We have a question. I mean, it's a big word around artificial intelligence. Is it something important for you investing when you invest in a company? I don't know. There's tools around AI in the company. I mean, what is your view on AI? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I wouldn't invest because there's AI. I certainly wouldn't invest because there's AI on the first slide of the deck. I do feel that sort of every one of our companies, again, depending on sort of the product that they're developing, need to access state-of-the-art technology. And in some cases, in some of our companies, we run platforms that look at sort of target combinations, sort of deep biology. You obviously sort of get the best AI tools that you can get and implement that into your research strategy. But in the end, we do develop sort of therapeutics. We develop molecules that need to have an impact on disease. And in my mind, you cannot make those things with a computer. The computer can be a tool, but it's not the product that we invest in.
Okay, thanks a lot, Roel. Philippe?
Yeah, I think that in the mid to long term, AI is going to play a huge role in pharma because it's going to accelerate R&D. It's going to accelerate the identification of patients and the access to the patients. So it's going to be a massive change for the industry. There's two issues with that. First, right now, we see a lot of companies that are branding themselves as AI company, where frankly it can be anything. It's not necessarily AI, and it's more of a buzzword than something real. So because it's been abused, when you see AI, you start being a little bit prudent nowadays. Again, don't make it about AI, make it about the patient. Once you have the story, the movie, as Roel was saying, about the patient, about what we can bring as a therapy, the fact that you managed to identify that asset through AI. Okay, great. Very interesting. We like that. But it's we're not buying AI. We're buying a program that is going to benefit patients.
Thank you very much. I just realized we are at the end of our webinar. Thanks a lot for taking the time to speak to us at 1 month away from JP Morgan. I think your advice are going to be very precious for all people online. And thanks all of you to be attending this webinar. We have some questions. We'll try to answer offline to your questions, and see you soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.